I know exactly how this story ends. I know because I was there when the last piece clicked into place, standing in a hospital break room at 2 a.m., holding a stranger's business card, trying to remember how to breathe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire. I'm a firefighter with Station 14 in Columbus, Ohio. I've been doing this job for 6 years. I've carried people out of burning buildings. I've held a stranger's hand while they took their last breath on the side of a highway. I've gone back into structures my captain told me not to enter because someone was still inside. I say all of this not to impress you. I say it because when my own life caught fire, I stood outside and watched it burn. And I couldn't explain why for the longest time. I just let it. My husband's name was Daniel. We met when I was 26. He was an architect, the kind who actually cared about what he built, not just the money, but the function, the way a space could make a person feel safe or anxious without them ever knowing why. I respected that about him immediately. We dated for 2 years, got engaged on a Tuesday night in our kitchen because he said he couldn't wait until the weekend. We got married on a Saturday in October, outside, under a sky that had no business being that blue in Ohio. I thought I had chosen wisely. I thought I had been careful. I thought I had paid attention to all the right things. I was wrong about all of it. This is the part I keep coming back to, not the betrayal itself, but how long I walked around not knowing. How many mornings I made coffee for 2. How many times I kissed him goodbye at the door. How many times I said, "I love you," and he said it back, and I believed him every single time. It started with a phone call on a Thursday afternoon. I was at the station doing inventory in the equipment bay when my personal cell buzzed. Unknown number, Columbus area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost let the whole thing stay buried. Is this Claire Merritt? A woman's voice. Careful. Deliberate, like someone choosing each word before releasing it. "It is," I said. "Who's calling?" There was a pause. Not a nervous one. A decided one. "My name is Joan Haskell. I'm the front desk manager at the Whitmore Hotel downtown. I don't normally do things like this. I want you to know that. But I've been thinking about this for 3 weeks, and I decided I'd rather regret saying something than regret staying quiet." I remember setting down the inventory clipboard. I remember the sound of one of the guys testing a ladder somewhere behind me. I remember the way the afternoon light came through the bay door and made a long rectangle on the concrete floor. "What is it?" I said. "Your husband has been staying here. Not every week, but regularly, for about 5 months. I wouldn't have put it together except that I recognized you. I've seen you at the community board events downtown. And the woman he's been with, she's been on the local news a few times. A real estate developer. Her name is..." "Stop," I said. Not because I didn't want to know, because something in my chest had just gone very quiet and very cold, the way a room feels right before the temperature drops and you realize the heat has been off for hours. "How do you know it isn't a business arrangement?" I asked. Because I had to, because I'm a person who needs to rule out every other option before I accept the worst one. Joan Haskell's voice didn't waver. "Because I work the front desk, honey. I see what I see." I stood in the equipment bay for a long time after the call ended. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call him. I just stood there and let the information move through me the way water moves through a cracked foundation, slow, quiet, and absolutely certain to cause damage. I told my captain I needed to leave early. I drove home. I made dinner. I set the table for 2. When Daniel came home that evening, I watched him the way I'd learned to watch a fire, looking for where it was sourced, where it had traveled, what it had already destroyed. He kissed me on the cheek. He asked about my day. He said the new project at work was stressing him out and that he might need to stay late a few nights next week. I said that was fine. I said I understood. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark and listened to him breathe and tried to understand how a person could be next to someone and be somewhere else entirely. The next morning, he left at 7:30. I waited 20 minutes. Then I opened his laptop. I'm not going to pretend I felt good about it. I stood in front of the desk for a long time before I sat down. I was raised to believe that privacy matters, that trust is the architecture of a relationship, the load-bearing wall you don't knock out without knowing what it's holding up. But Joan Haskell had called me, and something in her voice had told me she was not the kind of person who made that kind of call lightly. The password was our anniversary date. He hadn't changed it. I didn't know yet whether that made it worse or better. It took me 12 minutes to find what I was looking for. It was in a folder labeled Invoices 2024, nested inside a work folder I wouldn't have opened on a normal day. Inside were emails. 46 of them, going back to February. Her name was Renata. The emails were not ambiguous. The timestamps were not ambiguous. The timestamps were not ambiguous. The one from March that said, "Same room as last time, I already booked it," was not ambiguous. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and turned on the cold water and held my wrists under it for a while. It's something I do when I need to stay calm. The cold water brings me back into my body, back into the present moment, back into the person who makes decisions instead of the person things happen to. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Claire, you okay?" "You never call on a Friday morning." "Mom," I said, "I need to tell you something. The thing about my mother is that she does not panic. She raised 3 kids mostly on her own after my dad's deployment stretched into something none of us had planned for. She worked double shifts at the hospital for years. She learned to hold bad news without flinching, to let it settle, and then to ask the question that actually matters. She asked it now. What do you need? Not what happened. Not are you sure. Not maybe there's an explanation. Just, what do you need? I started crying. Not the quiet kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. The kind that has been waiting. The kind that brings everything up with it. I cried for the October wedding and the Tuesday proposal and the coffee. For 2 and every single morning I had said I love you and meant it completely. My mother stayed on the line. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She didn't make promises. She just stayed there. And sometimes that is the only thing that saves you. "Listen to me," she said when I had gone quiet. "You are a woman who runs into burning buildings. You are going to get through this. Not today, not easily, but you are going to get through this because that is who you are, and it has nothing to do with him." I wrote that down afterward. I still have it. I didn't confront Daniel that weekend. I know that surprises people, but I needed to think. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with before I walked into that conversation, because I had learned from my job that the most dangerous moment is the one where you react before you've assessed. You charge into a room without reading the structure, you end up under the ceiling when it comes down. I went to work Monday. I showed up Tuesday. I did my job. I talked to my crewmates. I ate dinner at the long table in the station kitchen and listened to Hernandez complain about his fantasy football team, and I laughed in the right places, and nobody knew. On Wednesday, my crewmate Deb found me in the locker room before shift. Deb has been with Station 14 for 11 years. She has a daughter in middle school and a rescue greyhound named Frank, and an ability to read a room that I have never fully understood. "Something's going on with you," she said. Not a question. "I'm fine," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "My first husband cheated on me. 2011. I know what that particular kind of fine looks like." I sat down on the bench. "How did you know? With yours?" "I found a receipt," she said. "Dinner for 2. On a night he'd told me he was working late, and I already knew. I'd known for a while. I just needed the piece that let me admit I knew." We sat there for a minute without talking. "What did you do?" I asked. "I made a plan," she said. "That's all you can do. You make a plan, and you execute it, and you don't let them see you fall apart before you're ready." That conversation kept me standing for the next 2 weeks. I did make a plan. I met with a lawyer, a woman named Patricia, who had an office near the short north and who handed me a box of tissues before I'd said a single word, like she'd already read the whole story in my face. I documented what I'd found. I organized. I was methodical about it because that was the only way I knew how to survive it. Treat it like a situation that required procedure. The night I confronted Daniel was a Thursday. Exactly 2 weeks after Joan Haskell's phone call. I had cooked dinner, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to be the one who controlled the environment. I needed him seated, comfortable, unsuspecting. I needed the advantage. He sat down and picked up his fork, and I said, "I know about Renata." He put the fork down. He didn't deny it. That was the thing I hadn't fully prepared for. I had built so many versions of that conversation in my head, most of them involving his denial, his excuses, his attempts to reframe. But he just looked at me across the table and the color left his face and he said, "How long have you known?" 2 weeks, I said. He pressed his hands flat on the table. He looked at them. "Claire, I don't need you to explain it," I said. "I need you to understand what's going to happen now." I told him what Patricia had advised. I told him what I had already filed and what would come next. I told him I had arranged for him to stay with his brother while we worked through the process and that I had already spoken to the building's property manager about changing the locks. He cried. "I want to be honest about that." He sat at the table I had set and he cried. And I sat across from him and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was pity. Not love. Not anymore. But pity. Because he had built something real and chosen to hollow it out from the inside. And now he had to stand in the wreckage of his own choice, and I genuinely did not understand how a person arrived at that decision. He asked me if I hated him. I thought about it. "No," I said. "I don't have enough energy left for that." He left that night with 2 bags. I stood at the window and watched his car pull out of the driveway. And when the taillights disappeared around the corner, I sat down on the kitchen floor and let myself fall apart the way I hadn't been able to in front of him. I cried until I couldn't anymore. Then I washed my face, made tea, and called my mother. She drove over at 10 o'clock at night without being asked. She brought soup she'd made that afternoon like she'd known, like she'd been ready. She sat with me at the kitchen table and we didn't talk about Daniel. We talked about everything else. Her garden, my niece's school play, a book she'd been reading about women explorers in the 1800s. We talked about everything except the thing that was broken, because sometimes the best way to survive a broken thing is to remind yourself that everything else is still intact. The weeks that followed were not easy. I won't pretend they were. There were nights I woke up at 3 a.m. with that particular specific grief that comes from absence, the cold side of the bed, the missing coffee cup, the quiet that had a shape to it now. There were moments at work where it hit me sideways, sudden and physical, and I'd have to step outside for a minute and just breathe. But there were other things too. The crew at Station 14 started quietly, collectively, making sure I was never eating alone. Nobody said anything about it directly. One day I just noticed that someone was always sitting down at the same time I did, always finding a reason to be in whatever room I was in during downtime. Hernandez brought in tamales his grandmother had made, enough for the whole crew, but he handed me mine first. The captain, who had not been told anything specific, said in a briefing one morning, "We take care of our own," and looked at me for just a moment before looking back at his notes. That's the thing about working with people who run toward emergencies for a living. They recognize a person in one. They don't make a scene about it. They just quietly surround you and stand there until you can stand on your own. 3 months after Daniel moved out, I went back to the community board event where Joan Haskell had apparently first recognized me. I didn't know she'd be there. I hadn't planned anything. I just wanted to start showing up to things again. Start taking up space in my own city, start being present in my own life. She was working the sign-in table. She recognized me before I said a word. She stood up. "I wasn't sure if what I did was right," she said. Her voice was different in person, warmer, a little uncertain. I've wondered about it ever since. It was right, I said. It was hard, and it cost me a lot of things, but it was right. She nodded. She looked relieved in a way that told me she'd been carrying that question for 3 months. Are you okay? I thought about that. I thought about the kitchen floor at 10 o'clock at night and my mother's soup and Deb in the locker room and Hernandez's tamales and the captain's voice saying we take care of our own. I'm getting there, I said. And I meant it in a way I hadn't been able to mean anything for a long time. There's a bulletin board in the Station 14 common room. It's covered in the usual things: shift schedules, safety memos, a birthday card for Martinez that's been up so long it's turned yellow at the corners. But last month, I pinned something new to it. A quote I'd found in my mother's book about those women explorers, women who crossed deserts and climbed mountains and sailed oceans in eras when people told them not to. Knowing what you're made of is not the same as being told. You have to find out the hard way. One of the newer guys asked me what it was for. I told him it was a reminder. He asked what kind. The kind you need, I said, when everything you thought was solid turns out to be something you have to rebuild. He nodded like he understood, even though I don't think he did yet. He will someday. Most people do. I still drive past the Whitmore Hotel sometimes, on my way to the East Side stations for joint trainings. I don't feel anything sharp when I see it anymore. Just a kind of acknowledgement that happened, and it changed things, and I'm still here. The building doesn't know it was a turning point in my life. Buildings never do. They just stand there while everything happens around them, indifferent and solid, holding up their ceilings. I've been learning, slowly, to be more like that, to stand, to hold things up without needing anyone to see me do it. My mother called last Sunday. She said I sounded different. Different how? I asked. Like yourself, she said. Like the version of you that existed before you started making yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's life. I didn't have an answer for that. I just stayed on the line a while, the way she had stayed for me, and let the silence mean what it meant. I'm still a firefighter at Station 14. I still drive the same route to work, still make coffee at the same time, still check the same equipment before every shift. Most of my life looks exactly like it did before. But it isn't, because I'm not. And I've stopped trying to go back to who I was because that person didn't know what she was made of yet. I do now.